welcome to Travel Talk. I'm Mary Pat Sullivan. I'm joined today by our editorial and thought leaders from throughout the travel industry. We're going to talk about global travel trends for 2023, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with our editorial teams. Yeah. So, we're all dancing. I'm listening to your answers, and we're all sort of dancing around this. So, I don't know, are we in the post-pandemic phase? Are we in the honeymoon phase? I don't know what phase we're in, but let's talk about 2023 in general. And so the question on everybody's mind is, are we fully back, right? Is the industry as a whole fully back? So, Rebecca, what do you think?
Wow. Are we fully back? And the question, I think, is back to what? Back to what? Are we back to...
What are we looking to get back to?
Right. So many people used 2019 as sort of that benchmark and say, well, we're X percent of 2019 numbers, or we're, X revenue of 2019 numbers. But what does it mean tangibly? I mean, and you'd also expect, I suppose, that if the pandemic had never happened, you would have grown beyond 2019 numbers. So it's really hard to say. I think that all of our constituents, all of our readers, in the backs of their minds, they know. I mean, we don't know what might happen in terms of another outbreak or some other concern that might put the damper on things before we're out of the pandemic, and I'm using air quotes. Well, I'm on video. Sorry. What is the new standard for success?
I do have something to say. I have been looking at this so much over the past year, and so there are certain vectors that I have seen. Are we back to supplier revenues? That's one measure. Are we back to trip volume? That's another measure. And I've kind of vacillated between those two to try to figure out, are we back? Are we, in corporate travel, are we spending at the rate that we did before? Probably. We aren't getting the number of trips out of it that we got in the past, but the spend is there, and the suppliers seem to be making that premium off of the corporate trip. So is that back? Yeah. Is the volume of business trips back? No. We just want to see that in business travel, for my audience, that the travel is taking place that needs to take place. And so I have a little bit of a different viewpoint of that. And in retail, it might be a bit different.
And I was going to go back and add that so many of our readers did actually have record years in 2022.
Say, right. Some of the travel advisors feel that they are already back.
They are back.
They're having record years in 2022. It's going to be an even bigger stuff in 23. So I don't think you can say as an industry we're fully back until you can look at the world and say there are no restrictions of COVID-wise.
But I think,
is that going to be a thing ever, though?
I think what's interesting, though, too, listening to all of you is, what's fully back mean anymore? Some of the changes that have taken place across our industry over the last couple of years, how many of them are for good? Right. Like what you just said, I think you're right. Does it matter how many trips you take? What matters more? So,
well, for our market, the virtual meeting, of course, has been a huge, and I should say the virtual interaction, right? Has been the definitive sort of break from the past versus now. I think the normalization of that video meeting, that video interaction, after you've established a relationship, that you can rely on that to a certain degree, that's never going away.
Right.
That is a defining moment in my industry, business travel, that will not change. How that is leveraged going forward, to what degree it is leveraged, if we see that companies who meet in person more often get a competitive advantage over those who don't, that will be something that we'll want to look at. But there's no going back. There's no going back to the before time.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, from our perspective at PhocusWire, one of the things that we're really looking at are the online travel agencies, the Expedia, the Booking, the Airbnb. And of course, we all know, and I'm sure we all experienced early in the pandemic and throughout really 2020, there was this rapid acceleration of e-commerce adoption. Everybody was stuck at home. Everybody was on their computer, searching, potentially booking at some point. We have data from Phocuswire, their most recent study for U.S. travelers, found that after hovering in the 40% range for several years. That figure has now jumped about 20 percentage points to about 63% of US travelers are booking their entire experience online. That is a huge jump. We don't expect to see that continue growing at that pace, probably level off, but that is one when you say what may stick around, certainly it seems like that may stick around. And even the most kind of offline sector, if you will, the in-destination experience, the tours, activities, experiences that maybe pre-pandemic were predominantly booked, you know, with someone in a destination, making a decision, walking up to somewhere, even that, the digitalization is really accelerating, and we're seeing a lot of that coming online to try to meet those consumer needs.
Yeah, I would say in our market, by most metrics, yes, things are back. You look at sporting events and they look the same as they did before a pandemic happened. But like all of your markets, it's different. I mean, you can go to a game and you can get some hand sanitizer. You know,
When did that happen before?
Which is not a terrible thing as an
Right.
experience, and it's just different the way it is. But sports remains strong and continues to remain strong, and you see it on your television for the big events, and you're seeing it all the way down to the youth level of the number of organizations that are still forming, the number of venues that are being built. You know, it's as strong as ever.
One of the things we haven't discussed here, and I think we need to, is the looming recession conversations. We're hearing it everywhere. We've heard some layoffs recently. And so let's talk about that and what we think the impact can be. Beth, let's start with you.
Well, right. So we just did kind of off camera talk about the layoffs in the tech industry. We've seen some layoffs in finance. And, you know, I think it remains to be seen whether a recession is really around the corner. What I have heard in certain corners, and I think maybe because of high demand on the leisure side, is that the travel industry might experience a more shallow depression than other parts of the global economy, which would be a wonderful and refreshing experience after what happened during COVID. But I do think, and I can only speak kind of from the business travel perspective, I think it could be definitely an impact on business travel because companies looking to reduce their financial outputs are going to be looking at reducing travel potentially. I do think there is a huge upside and a huge need on the smaller internal meetings front to continue to build that employee loyalty and employee engagement in the organizations, especially during times of potential layoffs or uncertainty. So I really think there are a number of vectors that could be affecting the business travel side of this, but then again, I can't really speak to the leisure side, so I'll hand it to you.
Yeah,
you
can. No, I can't. I think that you start off every year with the subcategory of headwinds, right? So this year is especially unknown. I think we've been talking about. There's been talk about recession for quite some time. How much that will impact travel, still, like you said, it still just remains to be seen. I don't know. Do you guys think?
I think on the leisure side, at least in my opinion, it's going to take a really serious recession to keep people from going because they've just been at home for too long and they want to get out there. How they travel could be different. They could change some of the elements and how many trips they take and how much they spend. But I think for the leisure side, at least, it would have to be a pretty serious recession.
Yeah, it would have to be significant. You might see more people opting to drive more so than fly.
It's more drivable.
Yeah, exactly. You change how you travel, but I think people still are going to want to travel because that demand is there.
I would agree as well. In our market, we look at professional sports, collegiate sports, and then this enormous youth and amateur space. And if you've been to a professional sports event, it's expensive, and yet they're still filling stadiums, pretty much the same at the collegiate level. And I think it's a legitimate concern at the youth and amateur level. At what point would a recession have to hit that you would seriously consider as a group of parents that your team is just not traveling to a tournament this year? We haven't seen it yet, but I agree, depending on where the economy goes, that's a legitimate concern.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, from our perspective, we spend a lot of our time tracking innovation in the industry, tech innovation and the startups. And, certainly this fear of recession and all these economic woes are have been having an impact on some of these startups and the way they're operating and maybe looking more for profitability versus growth. We also, through PhocusWire, have the data on funding to startups. And in 2022, I believe the latest figure we have is through November 1st, it was about $8.4 billion invested into travel technology startups. That is ahead of 2019, which was 8.3 billion, but now this big question mark with everything happening with the economy and global unrest and all these other, issues that are all very much related, what that might mean as far as the innovation space.
All right, thank you for joining us. This has been Mary Pat Sullivan. I've been so grateful to have all of our editorial leaders joining us today to have this conversation. Join us again soon.